My dad was a football player, a football coach, a boxer, and a Marine. He was also a bleeding heart, and I mean a bleeding heart liberal. He was a professor at a state college, and his refusal to wear a coat and tie ended the faculty dress code. During the Vietnam War era, he backed the student newspaper when the administration tried to shut the paper down for publishing things that were decidedly anti-war. I learned my liberalism from him. He worked on John F. Kennedy's campaign when he lived in California in 1959 and 60. He was active in his union. I am a progressive because he taught me the values I still hold. Being a professor, he had summers off. And when I was growing up in the 70s in central Massachusetts, the Red Sox would not put tickets on sale for center field bleachers until the day of the game. So many a day in the middle of the 70s, we would go down and stand in line for an hour or two, get tickets to the bleachers in center field and watch the Sox. And that kind of cemented my membership in Red Sox Nation. One game, we were sitting there and the Star-Spangled Banner begins to play. And my dad gives me a backhand flick right in the stomach, looks at me and says, "Take your hat off your head." Oh boy. And I took the hat off my head. And I had an interesting relationship with the Star-Spangled Banner for a while. I used to love watching on TV when the United States would win a gold medal at the Olympics and they'd raise the flag and they'd play the Star-Spangled Banner. And it always did remind me of going to baseball games with my dad. And I had that kind of respect most people grow up with in the United States, learning to take their hat off for the anthem, to salute the flag, to respect the country it stands for. And I kind of did that until Colin Kaepernick started kneeling. Now I kneel too. I know my dad would as well if he were still alive. He would say, "I did not get shot at by the Chinese in Korea so people would lose the right to protest. I got shot at by the Chinese in Korea so that people have the right to protest, even if that means disrespecting the flag and kneeling during the anthem." That's what he would say. That much I know to be true. Francis Scott Key wrote the poem that would become the Star-Spangled Banner aboard the British ship Minden while he was working for the release of prisoners of war and doing a prisoner exchange during the War of 1812. He watched the bombardment of Fort McHenry that night of September 7th, 1814, during the Battle of Chesapeake Bay. Our young country was little more than a generation old at that time, and our grip on independence from the British Empire still tenuous. A defeat that night might lead to the loss of Baltimore, the loss of Washington, D.C., or even the loss of the war and independence. The defense of Fort McHenry was published as a broadside on September 17, 1814. And 3 days later, Baltimore newspapers published the poem with a note to sing it to the tune of "Anacreon in Heaven," which was a drinking song from an English gentleman's club called the Anacreonic Society. And the tune was tricky enough that if you could sing it all the way through on key, you were sober enough for another drink. The Carr Music Store in Baltimore published the words and music together, all 4 verses, under the title "The Star-Spangled Banner." And this song grew in popularity through the 19th century, and there is record of the song being played or sung before baseball games. Take two. Two, 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 take two. Find this for take two. Francis Scott Key wrote the poem that would become the Star-Spangled Banner on board the British ship Minden while he was there working for a prisoner exchange during the War of 1812. Key was on that ship and he watched the Battle of Fort McHenry on that night of September 7th, 1814. His young country was little more than a generation old, and its grip on independence still tenuous. A defeat that night might lead to the loss of Baltimore, the loss of Washington, D.C., or even the loss of the war itself, and possibly the loss of independence from Great Britain. What he wrote, he called The Defense of Fort McHenry, and it was published as a broadside on September 17, 1814. 3 days later, Baltimore newspapers published the poem with a note to sing it to the tune called To Anacreon in Heaven, which was a drinking song from an English gentleman's club called the Anacreonic Society. The tune was tricky enough that if you were able to sing it in tune all the way through, you were sober enough for another drink. The Carr Music Store in Baltimore published the words and music together, all 4 verses, under the title The Star-Spangled Banner. The song grew in popularity through the 19th century, and there is record of the song being sung at baseball games as early as 1887. On July 27, 1889, then Secretary of Navy Benjamin F. Tracy signed General Order No. 374, making the Star-Spangled Banner the official tune to be played at the rising of the flag. On March 3, 1931, President Herbert Hoover signed a law making the Star-Spangled Banner our country's national anthem. Francis Scott Key's song was no longer about a triumphant battle, but about a triumphant nation. And his song came to be played anywhere people of this nation gathered, parades, memorials, sporting events. It celebrated our triumph, our glory, our power. We were a somebody among the nations, a somebody made up of somebodies gathered from other places around the world. When Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, the United States was largely a nation run by rich estate owners and businessmen and others of noble English descent. Women had no official say in the government, and slavery was legal, slaves being 3/5 of a person, and just about everyone still thought of the native inhabitants of our country as, the Constitution says, quote, bloodthirsty savages. By the time the song becomes our national anthem, women could vote. The bloodthirsty savages had been effectively, if not completely, exterminated, and a civil war had been fought over making people of African descent 5/5 of a person. Nearly 100 years into the Star-Spangled Banner as our national anthem now, we still forget about the native inhabitants of the land. A woman still has not been elected president, and we still have to march in the streets because African Americans still cannot get treated like a full person, and their lives still do not matter as much as white lives. Not that Francis Scott Key would care, however. He was a slaveholder and a racist. Lindsay Parker, editor-in-chief of Yahoo Music, wrote to remind us in an online essay last week that Key once said African Americans were, quote, a distinct and inferior race of people, which all experience proves to be the greatest evil that can afflict a community. Whew. A Smithsonian Magazine article by Christopher Wilson from 2016 notes that Key used his office as District Attorney of Washington, D.C. to regularly defend slavery. 19th century abolitionists made fun of his song and called it Land of the Free, Home of the Oppressed. He owned a bunch of human beings that would have kneeled every time his song was played. In a 4th of July piece for The Root online, Jason Johnson wrote, no one remembers that Key wrote a full 3rd stanza decrying the former slaves who were now working for the British Army in the War of 1812. That part reads, no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph does wave over the land of the free and home of the brave. The 4th of July is one of those national holidays, along with Memorial Day and Veterans Day, where we haul out these patriotic songs like Christmas carols, annual hymns to our American national myths. God bless America, America the beautiful, my country 'tis of thee, you're a grand old flag. All songs in the holiday section of the National Hymn Book. You know, I've kind of had it with the Star-Spangled Banner. It's full of violent war imagery, accompanied often enough at sporting events now by a flyover of actual warplanes, written by a raging proud racist, with peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters being attacked in the streets by a militarized police force, it makes sense in a terrible way that the Star-Spangled Banner is our national song. But like a Christmas carol or Easter hymn full of bad exclusionary theology, I want to replace it with something else to sing when the occasion calls for it. Something I can sing in good conscience. One of my suggestions for a new national anthem is Woody Guthrie's "This Land Is Your Land." Woody Guthrie wrote this as an answer song to "God Bless America," a song he hated. He thought the song told people what they wanted to hear and not what they needed to hear, and that it left out a lot of the America and a lot of the Americans he saw in the migrant camps and while he was riding the rails. So he wrote the kind of song he wanted to hear. His first version of this song was called "God Blessed America for Me." In good folk music tradition, Woody Guthrie borrowed the melody verbatim from a song called "When the World's on Fire" by country bluegrass singers the Carter family. Guthrie first recorded "This Land Is Your Land" in 1944 and first published it in 1945. For an excellent source on Guthrie, I recommend the biography "Woody Guthrie: A Life" by Joe Klein. And most people only know what became the refrain and first two verses of "This Land Is Your Land," but the song in its initial form is very long. And in its final version, when first recorded and released, had 6 verses. Many songbooks leave out the verses about class and poverty. In the original version of "This Land Is Your Land," Guthrie spoke about Depression-era poverty. The lyrics are, "In the square of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people. As they stood there hungry, I stood there asking, is this land still made for you and me?" He protested the institution of private ownership of land with the verse, "As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said no trespassing, but on the other side it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me." In another version of the song early on, the sign reads "private property." Either way, the song is both pastorally purposeful and looks to include more people in all of "We the People," and it's much more at home, let's say, in a Bernie Sanders rally with its democratic socialism version of America. And yet, this land being made for you and me isn't without its problems, because all of this land, from the New York Island to the Gulf Stream waters, was taken from the native inhabitants, the bloodthirsty savages, as the Constitution says, who became victims of the manifest destiny practice of genocide. Yes, we want a land made for everyone, but it can't be for you and me until we acknowledge that we are the sons and daughters of trespassers and purveyors of genocide. Maybe, if we ask forgiveness for this and truly begin to treat the land as sacred, as holy as its rightful inhabitants did, maybe we will realize a lesson they did try to teach us, that you cannot own the earth, that it is here, and either you treat it with reverence and share it, or you don't. Another song that comes to my mind when I think about what might be a more appropriate national anthem is "Lift Every Voice and Sing," number 149 in your Singing the Living Tradition hymnal. "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is explicit in its treatment of slavery and the Black experience in America. It's an antidote to the whitewashed status of so many of our patriotic songs. James Weldon Johnson wrote "Lift Every Voice and Sing" in 1900 as a poem for the celebration of Abraham Lincoln's birthday at the all-black Stanton School in Jacksonville, Florida, where he was principal. Johnson was also a lawyer and a civil rights activist. The poem was put to music by Johnson's brother, John Rosamond Johnson. In 1919, the NAACP adopted the song as the Negro National Anthem, and from there it became ingrained in the culture of the Black American community. It's been recorded by recording artists through the years, from Ray Charles to Dionne Warwick to John Legend to Beyonce. "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is a hymn found in our hymnal. Yet many of the congregations I've served have never sung it. My colleague, the Reverend Aisha Ansano, writes about this song, "Lift Every Voice is a very, very powerful song," she says, but it's often sung without context, and at times it's sung without intentionality. When you sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, do you pay close attention to the words? It's easy on a Sunday morning to open the hymnal and sing a song without necessarily processing what it's saying, what the words really mean. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died. We've come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. This song deserves to be sung with attention, she says. It is a song that starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country. And it is a song that should make us uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with the history that it calls upon, uncomfortable with the fact that the struggle for racial justice continues and has not come quite so far as it should have by now. How can anyone sing the words, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, without deep, deep discomfort? So when we sing this song, will you join me in singing with intentionality, she asks of us. Will you join me in the deep discomfort that I will be feeling in singing these words? Discomfort with the pain and horror that those words refer back to, and discomfort with the fact that those words do not only refer to a distant history, but also to what is happening now. Will you commit to sitting with your own discomfort, she asks of us? And then will you tap into that discomfort and do something? Will you lift your voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty? I will, and I hope you will too. There's no doubt the Star-Spangled Banner will soon be a song for national identity we must outgrow if our nation is to survive. What national song that new identity will require remains unknown. This Land is Your Land and Lift Every Voice are two songs we can use as interim national anthems, a team of anthems during this in-between time between the country and its narrative as it was, and our country and its narrative as it can and should be. A song I've been listening to a lot lately describes the difficulty with American history from the perspective of sensitive white people trying to figure out how to move forward. It's called We Americans, and it's from the latest Avett Brothers CD released last fall. And I want to leave you with some of it this morning, and I hope Scott and Seth and their label and publisher will not come after me for using it this morning.
I am a son of Uncle Sam, and I struggle to understand the good and evil, but I'm doing the best I can in a place built on stolen land with stolen people. I am a son of God and man, and I may never understand the good and evil, but I dearly love this land because of and in spite of we the people.